A woman accidentally discovered that her perfect husband actually had another family, including a 17-year-old son. At the beginning of the story, Minori and her husband, Yudai, enjoyed a happy family. In high school, Yudai helped Minori find her moon bracelet, and the two became first lovers. From their youthful school uniforms to their elegant white wedding dresses, the two walked hand in hand for 15 years of enviable, sweet moments. Minori believed herself to be the happiest woman in the world, and that she and Yudai would be happily married until their old age. Until one day, she stumbled upon Yudai's shocking secret. Yudai had forgotten his phone when he left the house, and as Minori was about to return it, a message arrived. The sender arranged for Yudai to meet at a jewelry store in Ginza the following afternoon. Although it was just an ordinary text, Minori's instincts told her something was amiss. Minori remembered Yudai saying he was having dinner with colleagues the next day. Why would Yudai lie to her? After handing her phone to Yudai, Minori didn't confront him directly. Instead, she immediately went to her best friend Sarah's law firm and asked her for help. She suspected Yudai might be having an affair. Sarah, however, thought Minori was just being paranoid and making a big deal out of nothing. The texter might be a colleague, and Yudai might have gone to the jewelry store to surprise Minori with a gift. While Sarah's words comforted Minori, they didn't dispel her unease. She returned home anxiously, where Yudai and their son suddenly came out to greet her. Together, they made Minori her favorite omelet rice, with "I love you" written on it by Yudai. Looking at her perfect husband and adorable son, Minori's doubts vanished. She felt she must have misunderstood Yudai. However, in the middle of the night, Minori discovered another message from the person. The message reminded Yudai not to forget their meeting time the next day. Based on the other person's tone, Minori suspected that this person and Yudai were more than just colleagues. To verify her suspicions, Minori followed Yudai to a jewelry store the next day. However, to her surprise, the person Yudai met was actually a high school boy. Yudai and the boy walked into the jewelry store together, choosing a necklace. Seeing their intimacy, Minori became extremely curious and speculated about their relationship. Minori followed them to a restaurant and continued her observation. Soon, another woman arrived, a woman Minori didn't recognize. Yudai looked as if she had known the woman for a long time. The lights suddenly went out, and a waiter placed a cake in front of the woman. Yudai and the boy then happily sang "Happy Birthday" to the woman. Yudai even took out the necklace he had just bought and put it on the woman. It seemed that today was the woman's birthday, and the scene was a picture of a happy family of three. Minori watched in shock, her world crumbling. She couldn't guess what Yudai's relationship with these two people was. At that moment, Minori received a call from her son, and she returned home, filled with doubts. Early the next morning, she went to the law firm and told Sarah everything she had discovered the previous night. While Minori couldn't confirm whether Yudai had cheated, she knew there was something fishy going on between him and that woman. Sarah suggested that Minori first confirm the relationship between Yudai and that woman, and only consider filing for divorce if it was confirmed. For the next few days, Minori secretly followed Yudai every day, but found nothing unusual. Just when she thought she had misunderstood Yudai again, the woman finally appeared. Their unrestrained intimacy filled Minori with rage. Even more infuriating was the fact that the three of them had gone home together for dinner. Minori fought back tears and took a photo. At the same time, she was finally forced to face a truth she had always been reluctant to admit. Yudai was indeed cheating on her. She longed to know when Yudai had begun to betray her. So, while Yudai was showering, Minori tried to unlock Yudai's phone, searching for clues. However, she tried numerous passwords, her birthday, their wedding anniversary, even their son's birthday, but none of them worked. Nearly discovering her, Minori had to put her phone down and find another solution. She sent Sarah the photos she had taken the previous night. Sarah looked at them and said they proved Yudai had been cheating. But to Sarah's shock, the woman in the photos was actually a classmate from their high school. The woman's name was Riko, and Minori had graduated from the same class as her. Minori immediately dug out her graduation album, and the moment she saw Riko's photo, she finally remembered. Riko had always been around Yudai throughout high school. This surprised Minori. That night, Minori tried to unlock Yudai's phone using Riko's birthday, and surprisingly, it worked. The phone contained numerous photos of the three of them. Yudai had been present at every crucial moment of the boys' development. In other words, Minori never monopolized Yudai. Yudai, while accompanying Minori and her son, also watched another child grow up. Minori's 15 years of happiness crumbled in an instant. She suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of absurdity and ridiculousness. At that moment, she vowed to herself that Yudai would pay. Sarah had discovered that the boy wasn't Yudai's child, but rather Riko's son from her previous marriage. Sarah offered to help Minori sue Yudai and Riko in court, promising her a substantial amount of alimony. However, Minori said alimony meant nothing to her. It couldn't compensate for the harm she'd suffered or restore the happiness she'd already lost. Since the law couldn't punish them, Minori would seek revenge on Yudai and Riko in her own way, destroying their home and their happiness. A son was the most important thing to a mother. Since Riko had stolen her husband, Minori would take Riko's son. So Minori transformed herself into a tutor and began deliberately approaching the boy. On her first day at work, Minori glanced around at the podium and noticed Wataru's gaze. Minori sensed Wataru's affection for her from his gaze. So after class, when she saw him lingering in front of a university brochure, she immediately approached and struck up a conversation. However, Wataru was shy, saying he hadn't yet decided which university to apply to. Just as Wataru was about to leave, Minori took the opportunity to get up close and personal with him. Wataru was too shy to look Minori in the eye, but Minori, aside from tying her tie, didn't make any unnecessary moves. She knew that adolescent boys crave contact with the opposite sex. But since she couldn't overcome her insecurity and shyness, Minori needed to approach Wataru gradually, and she was quickly able to win his heart. When Minori returned home from get-off work, she found her mother-in-law already taking care of the housework and caring for the children. Neither her mother-in-law nor her husband, Yudai, had any objections to Minori's sudden departure for work. The difference was that her mother-in-law was happy to help Minori take care of the child, and Minori felt both grateful and guilty. However, Yudai was different. While she claimed to support Minori's independence through work, she remained silent and unconcerned about Minori's specific position or occupation. The next day, Minori continued to seek out Wataru. Her primary concern was whether Wataru was indeed Yudai's biological son. To get this answer from Wataru, she needed to quickly become familiar with him. The most effective way to connect with an adolescent boy is to appeal to his interests. After observing him, Minori discovered that Wataru was particularly fond of a mobile game. So, Minori decided to capitalize on this to get close to him. Her method was simple: encourage Wataru to improve his lagging English score to 85, and she would reward him. Minori said she would give Wataru limited edition and Game Gear if he achieved his goal. Wataru was thrilled to hear such a reward and immediately pledged to study hard. Minori hadn't expected Wataru to fall for her ruse so quickly. However, her primary goal wasn't Wataru. She wanted to use him to learn about Yudai and Riko. Minori lost control of her emotions and asked a few more questions. When she noticed Wataru's slight unease, she realized she had been too eager. That night, Wataru actually began studying English. Yudai and Riko were both surprised. Riko checked the time and reminded Yudai to hurry home, otherwise Minori would become suspicious. Yudai dismissed the idea, saying that Minori was slow-witted and that Minori informed Sarah of her tutoring job. Sarah felt a bit heartless for having gone this far. Sarah persuaded Minori not to resort to such revenge. Instead, she should be honest with Yudai and sit down for a calm discussion. Even if she didn't forgive Yudai, Minori still had to think about the child. Minori's heart began to waver when she spoke of the child. So, she followed Sarah's advice and made an appointment with Yudai to talk after get-off work the next day. She thought perhaps their relationship could still be salvaged. At school, Wataru's grades came out, and he'd reached his target score in English. Minori happily opened the game, ready to redeem his reward immediately. But then, Wataru's phone rang. It was Yudai, calling to congratulate him on his good grades. Minori only needed to listen for a few words before she realized it might be Yudai. So, she tentatively asked Wataru if it was his father calling. Wataru was silent for a moment, then explained that the person on the phone wasn't his father, but someone who felt like a father to him. It turned out that Wataru's biological father had died before he was born. He had no memory of his biological father, and his mother had never mentioned him. When he was 3 years old, his mother suddenly brought a man with her. The man treated him very well, taking care of him when his mother was away. Later, Wataru gradually came to accept this man and learned that he was his mother's lover. This man was like a father to him, and Minori knew that this man was Yudai. Still, hearing about his image as a good father in that family brought Minori to tears. But what was certain was that Wataru was not Yudai's biological son. She suppressed her emotion and asked Wataru again, "Why hasn't that man married your mother?" Wataru was speechless for a moment. The dean suddenly rushed in, saying that Wataru's mother had collapsed and was hospitalized. Wataru immediately rushed to the hospital, and Minori felt uneasy seeing his anxious look. She wondered if Yudai would rush to the hospital with the same anxiety if he knew Riko was hospitalized. A short while later, Minori received a text from Yudai, informing her that he was working overtime tonight and would be home a little late. Concerned, Minori ignored her work and rushed to the hospital to verify the situation. Thankfully, Yudai was not there. Minori breathed a sigh of relief. However, just as she was about to leave, Yudai suddenly appeared. Furthermore, Yudai was so hurried that she completely failed to notice her standing nearby. Minori couldn't resist and went to the front of the ward to eavesdrop on their conversation. At this point, the dean of students called, urging her to return to school, so Minori had no choice but to return. That night, Yudai didn't return until late at night and didn't call her all night. What infuriated Minori most was that Yudai had completely forgotten about the conversation they had agreed to that morning. Clearly, in Yudai's mind, Riko and her son were more important than Minori and her son, who were her blood relatives. Minori had wanted to give Yudai a chance, but this was completely unnecessary. Minori felt that their relationship was irreparable. The next day at school, Wataru announced that he had decided to apply to the Department of Education at Keiho University, Minori's alma mater. Wataru hoped Minori would continue to tutor him and help him get into university. Minori asked him why he had decided on a university after just one day. Wataru explained that he needed to study hard from now on and not burden his mother with any more work, because his mother was pregnant. This surprised Minori. When Minori learned her husband was planning a second child with Riko, she was devastated. Minori had never imagined her husband would betray her so brazenly. Even more ironically, when her mother-in-law noticed Minori was unwell, she mistakenly assumed she was experiencing pregnancy symptoms. Minori couldn't help but smile bitterly at this. Because of her illness, Minori had applied for sick leave from school. Wataru, concerned about not being able to see Minori, went to visit her. Minori took the opportunity to ask Wataru about Yudai's intentions regarding a second child. However, Wataru's answer once again devastated her. Wataru explained that her stepfather was looking forward to the upcoming child and had promised his mother that he would marry her when the time was right. Minori was stunned. A dazed look on her face, she took the basket, said goodbye to Wataru, and went straight home. After returning from get-off work, Yudai brushed off Minori's illness with a few formulaic pleasantries, his attitude extremely perfunctory. Minori recalled Yudai's anxiety upon hearing of Riko's illness a few days earlier, and contrasted this with his now completely different attitude, and she felt a surge of anger. Seeing Yudai's feigned composure, and realizing how she had been kept in the dark by both men, Minori's desire for revenge grew stronger. Simply divorcing Yudai would not only fail to alleviate her resentment, but would also fulfill Yudai's wish to marry Riko. Talking about Riko, Minori became curious about his true feelings. So, she went to Riko's barber shop, where Riko was instantly shocked upon seeing Minori. They pretended to be meeting for the first time, but Riko, unprepared, seemed a little uneasy. Minori deliberately mentioned the necklace around Riko's neck. She knew it was a gift from Yudai. Minori's goal was to get Riko to talk about Yudai, but Riko lied and said it was a birthday present from her son. Seeing Riko unmoved, Minori then showed her a bracelet from the same brand, proudly stating it was a gift from her husband not long ago. Riko was beginning to feel overwhelmed. After all the exaggerated praise, she suddenly felt morning sickness and hurried to the bathroom to calm down. Riko couldn't help but feel that Minori's visit was no accident. She had been secretly with Yudai for over a decade, undisclosed. Minori had appeared just as Riko was pregnant, her words tinged with sarcasm and provocation, suggesting she had already noticed. As soon as Riko emerged from the bathroom, Minori approached her, asking if she was okay. Minori pretended to be nonchalant and asked Riko if she was experiencing any pregnancy symptoms. Riko nodded gently and asked Minori to return to her seat, saying she would be there shortly. After Riko calmed down and returned, Minori frankly admitted, "Pregnancy is truly difficult, and I need my husband's care the most. My successful delivery was entirely thanks to my husband's constant presence." Minori's words sounded boastful to Riko, and she responded unyieldingly. Although she's a single mother, she has a man who constantly supports her, and that's why our eldest son grew up healthily. Minori was deeply moved by these words and offered earnest advice. Responsible men should marry before having children, and choose their partners carefully to avoid the consequences of misjudging someone. Coincidentally, another customer arrived at the shop, and their first meeting ended there. Riko pondered Minori's words in the shop, growing increasingly uneasy. She hurriedly made an appointment to meet Yudai, hoping to confirm their commitment to marriage in person. However, Minori, anticipating Riko's meeting with Yudai, deliberately left her son with Yudai, leaving him at home. The next day, Minori arrived at school, and Wataru couldn't take his eyes off Minori's new hairstyle. Minori saw the tender admiration Wataru displayed in his praise, and smelled the faint scent of his men's perfume, knowing he was deeply in love with her. This way, she could exploit Wataru's trust and learn everything about Yudai and Riko, thus ensuring her revenge plan would proceed smoothly. So, she offered Wataru a reward. "If you rank in the top 10 on the next exam, I'll grant you any request you can." Wataru blushed and became filled with motivation and anticipation for the upcoming exam. But before that, he wanted to meet with Minori privately to clarify an important matter. Wataru sent an invitation in-game, and Minori accepted, sending Wataru the location of the cafe. As soon as the message was sent, Yudai suddenly approached and embraced Minori. Yudai had recently noticed something strange about Minori, and she wanted to disarm him with her attentions. Minori saw through Yudai's true intentions, and despite deep resentment towards his approach, she forced herself to appear happy. Sarah had warned her not to let Yudai discover anything until she was fully prepared for her revenge. Riko found perfume in Wataru's room and a flirtatious message in the game chat box, asking Wataru to meet up with an online friend. Riko couldn't help but think of Minori's words, and then she saw the person's username matched Minori's initials. Riko could no longer maintain her composure, and she began to suspect it was Minori. To confirm her suspicions, Riko used the location in the chat message to go to the cafe where her son had met his online friend. However, she was too late. Wataru and Minori had already left the cafe and were heading to the nearby beach. Wataru had asked Minori to meet him because he wanted to know why she was so shocked to hear his mother was remarrying. Minori quickly explained that she was simply concerned about how her family situation might affect Wataru's academic performance. Since Wataru had mentioned this, Minori took the opportunity to inquire about whether Riko had mentioned marriage recently. She remembered that Riko hadn't answered the question at the barbershop. Wataru sheepishly admitted that his future stepfather was married, but as long as his mother was happy, it didn't matter to him, considering he had diligently cared for them for over a decade. Although he wasn't married to his mother, he had a good character. Even if he had acted inappropriately, it was due to family issues, so his behavior was understandable. Wataru only saw the happiness his infidelity would bring to his mother, completely unaware that it would tear another family apart. Minori, emotionally agitated, harshly rebuked Wataru, then quickly realized her misstep. She reacted strongly because of her strikingly similar family background to Wataru's. Minori grew up fatherless, her mother never explaining his absence. Even after her mother's death, he remained absent. On the day of her mother's death, she learned from relatives and friends that she was the product of an extramarital affair. Later, her grandfather adopted Minori, but she has been burdened with guilt over her life ever since, unable to comprehend the need for infidelity. Influenced by her family, Minori has always longed for a complete and happy marriage. At this point, Minori received a call from Yudai. When Wataru heard Yudai's name, he was stunned. He asked in disbelief if the man she called was named Yudai. Minori explained that Yudai was also her husband, and Wataru dismissed it as a coincidence. Overwhelmed, Minori confessed to Wataru that she had deliberately approached him. After venting her anger, Minori declared she would never see Wataru again and resolutely turned away. Riko, not seeing Wataru, went straight to Yudai. Seeing Minori wasn't with Yudai, Riko became even more certain that the person Wataru had met today must be Minori. When Wataru didn't respond to her messages, Riko became increasingly anxious, convinced that Minori was a wicked woman who had seduced her son. With a fierce expression, she vowed to herself, if Minori dared to harm Wataru, she would pay the price. Minori gradually calmed down on the way home, regretting her impulsive confession to Wataru. She was even more indignant that Yudai's other family showed no remorse for their infidelity. Wataru didn't return home until dusk. Riko worriedly asked him about it, but he refused to let her in. Wataru opened his game and discovered that Minori had blocked him. The next day at school, Wataru saw that his grades were in the top 10. However, he couldn't go to Minori to claim his reward. A classmate told Wataru that Minori had resigned. Minori told Sarah that she had impulsively confessed to Wataru. Minori was worried that Wataru had told Yudai and Riko about the situation. Yudai had arranged a meeting that evening, and she suspected he might want to explain things in person. Sarah advised Minori to remain calm if the situation was true. In Sarah's experience, a husband caught cheating would feel relieved to no longer have to hide it. He no longer had to lie or pretend, and he might even immediately kneel down and apologize to his wife. In such a situation, Minori must not be soft-hearted, as a show of weakness is often a common tactic used by the other party to reduce the amount of compensation. Minori took note of Sarah's instructions and returned home. Her mother-in-law had already arrived and worriedly asked if she had quit her stable job because of Yudai. Minori's eyes welled up with tears, touched by her mother-in-law's concern. Although she felt the urge to confess Yudai's infidelity, she remained silent, fearing the possibility of hurting her mother-in-law. As night fell, Yudai returned home, and Minori was ready. As expected, he immediately apologized, bowing his head as he entered, but he only apologized for not paying enough attention to Minori recently, and his tone was serious. Minori was confused, and Sarah reasoned that this meant Wataru hadn't told Yudai and Riko about the previous day's conversation. Wataru's secrecy might be due to his feelings for Minori, and he likely sided with her. Sarah suggested that Minori stay in touch with Wataru. Wataru, still feeling guilty about Minori, went to Minori's house in person. Minori was surprised to see Wataru, and even more surprised to see Yudai return at that very moment. Minori, Yudai, and Wataru unexpectedly met in front of Minori's house, and the situation became awkward for a moment. But Minori made a look at Wataru, and they pretended not to know each other. Then, Minori asked Yudai if she knew the boy in front of her. Fearing Minori would discover their connection, Yudai lied, saying Wataru was the son of a college classmate and that she had come to his house to ask him some questions. After that, Yudai pulled Wataru aside for a conversation. Minori watched the two men from behind, feeling uneasy. She only hoped Wataru wouldn't tell her everything he knew. Yudai angrily questioned Wataru, asking why he had come so hastily. Didn't he realize that this would arouse Minori's suspicion? Wataru said he had come only to ask when Yudai and his mother would marry. Yudai didn't give a definitive answer, simply saying that he had always loved Wataru's mother and that he should not worry and should not come to his house again. Minori returned home, distracted. His son told him that a beautiful woman had come to the park to play with him and his father the previous day. Minori was deeply shocked by this, certain the woman her son was referring to as Riko. Instantly, a surge of fear overwhelmed Minori, and she rushed forward, hugging her son tightly. Yudai returned home, and Minori curiously inquired about his conversation with Wataru. Yudai simply replied that it was just family matters, and Minori stopped asking. The son clamored for milk from the convenience store, so Minori went out to get some. Seeing Wataru still waiting, she pulled him aside to ask. Wataru said he had come to apologize. He explained that after returning from the beach, he realized that he had been avoiding the story of his mother's affair with Yudai, comforting himself with "as long as my mother is happy," while ignoring the hurt it had caused Minori. Therefore, he apologized in person. Minori, seeing Wataru's sincerity, could not bear to criticize him, and she wanted to know more about his conversation with Yudai. Although Wataru knew Yudai's words would upset Minori, she refused to lie and relayed everything. Minori fought back tears, quickly sensing Wataru's affection and seizing the opportunity to gain his sympathy, ultimately making him her ally. It was already dark when Minori returned home. As she entered, she heard Yudai excitedly talking on the phone. Minori vaguely overheard some conversation about her marriage to Yudai and money. Although Minori didn't hear the entire conversation, these few words were enough to startle her. She was curious about who Yudai was talking to, and she kept guessing what they meant. Finally, Minori couldn't resist asking Yudai who he had just spoken to. Yudai was slightly startled, then replied that it was a colleague. Minori, naturally, didn't believe him, but she didn't press the issue. Yudai quickly changed the subject, excused himself to shower. While this was a perfunctory response, he still worried Minori would become suspicious. To reassure Minori, he planned to take her to a high-end restaurant to celebrate their anniversary that weekend. Minori knew it was a flattery, but she still feigned anticipation. The anniversary was a very important one, so her mother had specially bought Tsukishiro jewelry for Yudai to give to Minori, and she also told him to treat her well, and that things would only get better. The mother's words were very meaningful. That weekend, at the upscale restaurant, the two reminisced about the past, the unforgettable memories, the joys, the sorrows, and how, unknowingly, they had been together for 17 years. Minori asked Yudai a question she had long wanted to ask. Have you truly loved her in these 17 years? Minori had just gotten her husband's answer when she was interrupted by a call from the hospital. It turned out that Minori's grandfather was critically ill and hospitalized. He was Minori's last remaining relative. Upon arrival, the doctor announced that his cancer had spread. Minori was overcome with self-blame, having neglected to care for him. Grandpa didn't blame Minori. Knowing his time was running out, he told her the truth about Minori's life. Grandpa explained that the bracelet Minori was wearing was actually a token of love from the president of Woolsung Jewelry. Woolsung Jewelry's president, Woolsung Jin, was Minori's father. Woolsung Jin had cheated on Minori's mother while they were married, and when she became pregnant, he cruelly abandoned her for fear of exposure. Minori's mother insisted on having the child. Soon after, Woolsung Jin, fearing the news of their illegitimate child would be revealed, offered a large sum of money to buy Minori, but was rejected. Minori's mother then passed away in a bizarre accident. Woolsung Jin approached Grandpa again, hoping to buy Minori away. Grandpa couldn't forgive him for what he had done, and he didn't want Minori to acknowledge him as his father. He refused to let him take Minori away. However, Grandpa accepted Woolsung Jin's substantial child support and stocks, which he kept for Minori. Now, that money has greatly increased in value, becoming a vast fortune, making Minori a multimillionaire. However, even with tens of millions in assets, Minori couldn't be happy. Minori suddenly recalled Yudai's phone call that day and remembered how he always kept an eye on Wetching Jewelry's stock price. These details became increasingly alarming, and she suddenly had a terrifying suspicion. Could it be that Yudai already knew her identity? But how could he know a part of her life that even Minori herself was unaware of? The thought terrified Minori, feeling that Yudai's infidelity was more than just a simple affair. Perhaps there was something more hidden behind it than she knew. Carrying this terrifying suspicion, Minori returned home. Mother-in-law had already taken care of everything for Minori at home. She learned from Yudai that Minori's grandfather was in the hospital. Minori was grateful for her mother-in-law's concern, but just as she left, she saw a message from Yudai on her mother-in-law's phone. Yudai explained that Minori had received the money and that they needed to act quickly. At that moment, her mother-in-law suddenly snatched the phone away. Minori slowly walked to her room and turned on her computer. She knew her mother-in-law's messaging software was synced with her computer. After logging in, Minori was shocked to see that her mother-in-law, Yudai, and Riko had formed a 3-person discussion group, plotting to divide up her property. Riko even addressed her mother-in-law as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, clearly indicating that her mother-in-law already knew about her relationship with Yudai. Minori, in disbelief, searched the chat history until a photo of the 3 of them suddenly appeared, and she instantly collapsed. Thinking that she had been kept in the dark and had become the target of their wealth division, Minori's anger reached its peak. Wataru developed a crush on his mother's rival and offered to help him avenge his mother. However, Minori's target of revenge was actually her hypocritical mother-in-law. Her mother-in-law had long known that Minori was the illegitimate daughter of a wealthy chaebol, and that she had condoned her son Yudai's infidelity and conspired to covet her fortune. Minori was deeply disgusted by her mother-in-law's hypocrisy and immediately wanted to find out how she knew her background and her inheritance, as well as her connection to the Tsukishiro group. Minori immediately asked her mother-in-law about her youth. Seemingly overwhelmed by her impending plot, her mother-in-law recounted her experiences. After divorcing Yudai's father, she took young Yudai to Tokyo to make a living. Despite toiling day and night, she still struggled to make ends meet. Later, she worked as a maid in the household of a wealthy company president, where her life improved slightly, a turning point in her life. She met a close friend at the president's house, who later became his secret lover. Hearing this, Minori was startled, realizing that the friend her mother-in-law was referring to was most likely her mother. She explained that she had repeatedly tried to persuade her friend with kind words, but she hadn't listened. Ultimately, this friend not only lost her job, but also tragically passed away in a car accident. Minori finally confirmed that the friend her mother-in-law was referring to as her mother, and that the CEO's family was actually Tsukishiro Group. Minori's suspicions were spot on, but her mother-in-law was hiding something. Hiromi, her mother-in-law, discovered Minori's mother's affair with Tsukishiro Susumu. Seeing him rise from ordinary to extraordinary, she felt deeply unbalanced. Hiromi followed the two, took photos, and leaked the news to a newspaper. Once the news broke, Minori's mother was forced to break up with Tsukishiro Susumu and was expelled from Tsukishiro Group. Hiromi, whose revelations were discovered, was also dismissed from Tsukishiro Group. Hiromi later learned that after Minori's mother's death, Tsukishiro Susumu had given Minori's grandfather a large sum of money. Thinking of Minori inheriting this fortune, Hiromi grew jealous of her. She later discovered that her son and Minori attended the same high school. Hiromi felt this was a divinely gifted opportunity to turn things around, and she immediately instructed her son to pursue Minori. However, Yudai clearly had his heart set on Riko, but Hiromi advised him to maintain 2 relationships simultaneously. She also told her son that Minori was the illegitimate daughter of a wealthy tycoon and would inherit a large fortune. If he wanted to avoid a life of financial hardship, he should pursue and marry Minori. Yudai, fed up with his financial struggles since childhood, broke up with Riko to ensure his future. According to his mother's plan, he pursued Minori and successfully married her. A few years later, Yudai ran into Riko, now a single mother. Remembering his mother's words, they began an extramarital affair that lasted 15 years. At this point, Yudai's life of shuffling between 2 families was coming to an end. Yudai believed he would soon inherit Minori's fortune, divorce her, and marry Riko. However, when Yudai mentioned Minori's full name, Riko realized her son's teacher shared the same last name, and she immediately realized it was Minori. Minori had been approaching Wataru for a while, and Riko panicked. Wataru was packing his bags, about to leave, and Riko quickly questioned him about going to see Minori. Wataru simply told his mother that he knew everything and was willing to let Minori use him even if she wanted to. He didn't want his mother to be the perpetrator who destroyed another family. Riko, enraged, slapped Wataru, but Wataru broke free from his mother's attempts to stop him and resolutely left home. Minori explained the situation to Sarah, who said she would draft a divorce agreement for them as soon as possible and suggested that Minori begin preparing for the divorce. Minori, however, didn't want Wataru to be too involved. Unexpectedly, the next day, Wataru braved the pouring rain to visit Minori. Minori brought him home to change, but Wataru suddenly pulled Minori into his arms. Wataru told Minori about his argument with his mother and his running away from home. He apologized for hurting her and offered to do anything to avenge her, simply asking for her forgiveness. However, Minori insisted that Wataru had done nothing wrong and that he was not the one to apologize. So, after Wataru changed his clothes, Minori let him go. Soon after, Minori's grandfather passed away. In his final moments, he apologized to Minori and told her to live her own life. For Hiromi and Yudai, their grandfather's death was a long-awaited day, but it was only then that Minori's revenge officially began. At her grandfather's funeral, Minori's father, Tsukishiro Susumu, finally appeared. Minori would join forces with her father to exact revenge on Hiromi and Yudai. After the funeral, Minori and her father spoke alone in the morning hall. Minori told her father that she knew everything about her mother and the Tsukishiro group. She hated the Tsukishiro group and her father for ruining her mother and her life. Tsukishiro Susumu felt deeply guilty towards Minori and her mother. He blamed himself for not protecting them and offered to do anything to atone for his sins. Minori then shared her revenge plan with her father. Yudai and Hiromi had been uneasy since Tsukishiro arrived at the funeral. Now, Minori had spoken to Tsukishiro Susumu for a long time, and they were curious about what they had discussed. After returning home, her mother-in-law was about to inquire about their conversation. Unexpectedly, Minori revealed that Tsukishiro Susumu had come to meet her. Hiromi feigned shock, saying, "So my daughter-in-law is the daughter of the chairman of the Tsukishiro group." Minori then explained that Tsukishiro Susumu had just discussed some financial matters with her. Hiromi's mother-in-law was secretly delighted, as everything had unfolded exactly as she had anticipated, yet she still feigned consideration for Minori. Hiromi was reassured that she and Yudai would soon possess Minori's fortune. She even eagerly took out a loan for cosmetic surgery and booked a tour, planning a Hawaiian vacation after receiving the fortune. However, little did she know that Minori's revenge plan had already begun. Hiromi happily went to her employer's house to work, only to be informed that she had been fired. At first, she shrugged it off, figuring one less job wouldn't matter since she wouldn't need work soon anyway, so she happily moved on to her next employer's house. Over the next few days, all of her employers fired her without exception, leaving Hiromi bewildered. Yudai also suffered a workplace blow when a key client, Tsukishiro Group, suddenly and unilaterally terminated all projects. This incident resulted in significant financial losses for the company, and Yudai, as the liaison officer for Tsukishiro Group, was severely reprimanded by his superiors. However, just as Yudai was being reprimanded, Wataru suddenly arrived at the office. Wataru, in front of Yudai's colleagues, pleaded with Yudai to end his relationship with his mother. Their colleagues immediately realized that Yudai was having an affair. Seeing the situation was dire, Yudai attempted to remove Wataru from the office. Wataru, however, broke free and demanded a clear explanation in person. Yudai harshly rebuked Wataru for his ungratefulness. Wataru, upon hearing this, was deeply disappointed with Yudai and even more certain that he would never bring happiness to his mother. After Wataru left, Yudai noticed his colleagues looking at him strangely. He tried to explain himself to them, but it was impossible to conceal the fact that he, while pretending to be a loving wife, was actually an unfaithful man. After being fired repeatedly, her mother-in-law finally realized that Minori might be responsible. Since the funeral, she'd been experiencing a lot of trouble. She believed Minori must have leaked the information to Tsukishiro Susumu, allowing him to use his power to make it difficult for her to find a job. Seeing her mother-in-law's frustrated expression and insinuations, Minori confessed everything without reservation. Minori told her mother-in-law that she had known for a long time that she worked at Tsukishiro Group in her youth. The friend her mother-in-law had mentioned was Minori's mother. On the day of the funeral, Minori asked her father to help her seek revenge on her mother-in-law and husband. Tsukishiro Susumu immediately agreed after seeing Hiromi's photo, as he hated Hiromi for leaking the information to the weekly magazine. Minori then exposed her mother-in-law's plot to seize her wealth, a plot she still grudgingly denied. Minori leaned over to her mother-in-law's ear and whispered how she would repay the large loan she had taken out for cosmetic surgery and a vacation. After all, her mother-in-law would never again receive any of Minori's wealth. After her scheme was exposed, her mother-in-law lost control and lunged at Minori. At that moment, her grandson ran out, but her mother-in-law hysterically told him to leave. Not to be outdone, the grandson also told her to leave. Minori felt deeply relieved to hear her son's words. That way, she could sever ties with her mother-in-law without hesitation. After sending her mother-in-law away, Minori sat alone in the living room, laughing ecstatically. Suddenly, Wataru called her and told her about his visit to Yudai. In fact, Wataru was deeply saddened after saying those words to Yudai because he truly loved her. Minori, on the other hand, was heartbroken. After all, she and Yudai had once loved and trusted each other so deeply. After returning home, Yudai cautiously asked Minori if she had heard the news from the company. Minori, understanding that he was referring to the revelation of his infidelity, broke off her concealment and confessed the truth. Yudai panicked and tried to defend herself, but Minori retorted, "Didn't your mother-in-law tell you?" Only then did he realize there were over a dozen unread messages from his mother on his phone. Yudai continued to argue until Minori threw out a photo of Yudai, Riko, and their son. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Yudai immediately changed her tune and begged Minori not to divorce, even using their son as an excuse. However, Minori taunted him, suggesting he pay more attention to Riko's unborn child. Minori claimed that Yudai would soon lose her job due to her infidelity, and how would she support the child? Yudai was speechless, realizing that the cancellation of the Wechung group was a plot orchestrated by Minori. Minori presented chat logs between Yudai and her son, stating that she knew they were in debt and intended to use her assets to pay it off. She categorically stated that they wouldn't receive a penny. Yudai immediately knelt, begging for forgiveness and a chance to mend their ways, but Minori, without hesitation, produced the divorce agreement she had prepared.